Bayelsa West. The President, I rise to lend my voice to the motion that these bills introduced by the executive as part of a comprehensive tax reform in our country be read a second time. In doing so, Mr. President, I remind us that by our rules, at this stage, we are to discuss the general principles and not specific details and provisions. And I rise to say that I agree in general the need for a comprehensive tax reform in our country. We don't have an economy that is taxation based and taxation driven. It's an economy that is sometimes difficult to track, sometimes difficult to predict. And that's not the best for us. In our system, if you look at the tax ratio, even in African countries, our tax reliance is just about 7% or even less, 7% of our population. Compared to the GDP, the tax to GDP ratio, this country is one of the least. And that doesn't speak to progress, it speaks to stagnation and backwardness. Even the African ratio is 15% tax to GDP. And it's understandable because the founding fathers of this country based economies pre-independence on taxation, even taxing cattle. They call it the jangali in the north. And people were paying. They could plan the economies. And that was when they did major things in all regions. But all of that changed, Mr. President. The moment oil was discovered in the creeks of the Niger Delta, 1957-58, Nigeria found free money in the creeks of the Niger Delta, and we left taxation, just as we left agriculture and manufacturing. So that's where we are. So the attempt by the current administration to let the governments of Nigeria, all levels, they run on tax and tax revenue is something that I fully support. I am aware that some issues have been raised, and that is legitimate. We're a country of diverse people, diverse cultures, diverse expectations, and that's the beauty and the greatness of Nigeria. We cannot expect to be a country that speaks with one voice or sees things only from one perspective. All those are legitimate observations and fears and expectations. All we're expected to do is to harmonize all of this and enact laws in the national interest, which I believe, following our rules, after the second reading, at the committee stage, when the public hearing is held, everybody who has anything to say will be invited to say, as the chairman of the committee has said. Now, there are issues I am concerned with. Some of these issues that have been raised are also as a result of insufficient consensus building and consultation prior to the introduction. And it's understandable. As a former governor, while some governors express concern at the neck, that is legitimate. That consultation should have taken place. And I believe between now and at the end of our legislative activities, more consultations will happen. But that does not detract from the essence of the legislations that have been sent to us. For example, there is emphasis on derivation according to taxation. And the attempt now is to encourage states to be productive. And why not? A situation where states will abandon their core responsibility to create an enabling environment, attract investment, promote economic activities, so that that state can boost its revenues. That's a good thing, that's not a bad thing. I am concerned from where I come from the experiences you and I have, where oil workers are flown into oil platforms in Akwa Ibom, in Eket and Ibuno, in Akwa Ibom, or flown into Borno and other areas in River State, or flown into Brass in Bayelsa and in Southern Niger area, and in Delta State in Ogola and Foropa, Ogola and Fokadus. We are entrusted that this is an opportunity for the payee taxes from those oil workers to be calculated and paid to the oil producing states where those activities are generated, as against being calculated and paid to where the head office is located, as has been the case, where the tax is registered. And from the general principles underlying this bill, as explained yesterday, there is a move and a commitment by the executive to address that issue of revenue derivation, to ensure that paying taxes, even for the oil workers that are flown in and flown out every day after their work, or 2 days, be calculated and paid. If that is done, I think that is a good move that should be supported. The other area in VAT, according to derivation, when we get to the committee stage, we'll look at the specific details. But there's nothing wrong in saying that the telephone calls that are made in Bayelsa or Akwa Ibom or Sokoto or Kano, the VAT on those things that are consumed, be calculated and paid to those states. And we are told that that is the essence of these bills. And there's nothing wrong about it. Because VAT is a consumption tax, it's not a production tax. Those who are in the states who consume services, the VAT accruing to those should be calculated and paid. I'm sure when we look at the details, we'll see whether there is enough mechanism to guarantee transparency and accuracy in terms of administration. Those are some of the things we'll fine-tune. So, Mr. President, this is a good move, and there is an effort also to reduce the burden of taxation on Nigerians. Corporate taxes by the proposal. If you read the bills, there's a proposal to reduce corporate taxes from next year, reducing it from the 30% that it is currently to 25%. So that is a good move. And there's also a move to remove the people at the lowest level in terms of their salaries and so on, to exempt them completely from taxation. These are good things in this bill that should be encouraged. Mr. President, it is for these and other reasons, and principally as a federalist, which I've been all my adult life, I see these bills as a move towards entrenching fiscal federalism in Nigeria, which I fully support. So, Mr. President, I use this opportunity to call on all my colleagues to agree that these bills, all 4 of them, should be passed for second reading to enable our committee and the experts and the general public engage in accordance with our rules. Thank you.
Distinguished colleagues, I rise to second this motion on the lead debate on the Nigeria tax reforms bills and the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, we have since yesterday exhaustively examined all the aspects of this tax reform bill. and in line with our legislative procedure in making laws, agreed earlier today that these bills be passed for a second reading, so that when it is referred to the appropriate committee, especially at the third reading, all the gray areas and areas of concern by Nigerians and some concerned citizens should be addressed appropriately at that level. And I think at this point that I will urge all my colleagues to support the second reading of this bill so that we pass it to the relevant committees, having exhaustively debated on this matter earlier on today. I so submit, Mr. President.
Discussed. Reforms is necessary if we have to move forward. Even in our lives, you look at where you are, where you want to be, and how you want to be, so that you get there. I am not against reforms, and I'm not against these reforms, tax reforms. My problem is, number one, the timing. The timing as it is today, when you talk about reforms to Nigerians, whether it's good or bad, they misconceive it. And as we said, I just want to add to what distinguished Senator Sariki Dipo said, Senator Dixon said. He talked eloquently and explained so many things. There are 4 things or 3 there. But as you said, the time for that would be at the public hearing or when we pass it to the second reading. But let it be on record that my problem with the bills, I've said 1, that is the timing. Number 2, the issue of derivation made the reform contagious, contaminated, and contradictory in some cases, because the Constitution has to be amended in order for some of these proposals to be effective. I'm glad we are doing constitutional review. So even if it means reviewing the Constitution, this is general principle. As you said, or as the senators decided, we should not throw away the baby with the bathwater. I would have preferred we remove the baby and throw away the water first. And that is to go with what the governors and NEC proposed, that this bill should be withdrawn so that, and they are not saying that the bill should be killed. No, you withdraw the bill, work on it, and then submit it to the National Assembly again after getting the buy-in of the governors and NEC and even our traditional rulers. Mr. President, let's be honest to ourselves. If we sit down here, work on these bills, assuming as it is now, because the governors have not come out publicly to change their position. The traditional rulers have not sat down publicly to change their position. NEC have not sat down to change their position. And for me, as I said, I looked at the bill. The bill contains so many good things, but these 2 things, derivation and VAT, even though you say it will be addressed at the public session, it's not something that many of us will agree to it. You started by saying we are going to negotiate, which is good, and it's coming from you. But why don't we negotiate first before we come out to take a position? The tax, something that looks attractive, may not necessarily be that. Because if you transfer or you move people from lower income from VAT, and then you increase their taxes, the corporate taxes, the person that is manufacturing that goods will now transfer the VAT cost to it. So it means you gave him with the right hand and it was taken, or it's taken on the left hand. Secondly, the corporate tax you are talking about, when you remove the lower income, which is good, but then in the bill, they say 50 million to billion, 25%. They reduce it from 30% to 25%. If a small person or medium enterprising company makes up to 50 million per year, and you are charging him the same percentage with companies that are earning billions and declaring billions of profit. I give you an example back. So the person that is in Navy managing to manufacture shoes and his turnover turns up to be 50 million, you are charging him the same with somebody that is sitting down with pen and paper. Read it, and you see.
Senator Ndube, you have 30 seconds. You have 30 seconds to conclude.
I don't know whether that is fair, Mr. President.
On the general principles of the bills. You have 30 seconds.
So, in conclusion, Mr. President, the third problem I mentioned, if the people, through the governors, and then the NEC and the traditional rulers say that the bill should be withdrawn, make some necessary amendments, and then bring it back, and we can pass it in 24 hours. That is my position, Mr. President.
Noted. The things that are among Lagos, no, please sit down. If you are traveling from Lagos to Akwa Ibom, all the local government people, the tax collectors will run from the bush and block your car. And then they will ask you whether you have tire permit, whether you have exhaust permit, and they will mention that this is Onyawe local government of Edo. As soon as you pass there, you get towards Onitsha, they will block you again and ask you for the same thing. And then they will show them, they will say, no, that one you paid for Edo, we are talking about Anambra. You move from there, you get to Ihiala. They will say, stop. What of the one for Abia? So multiplicity. In fact, it frightens you to move on the road in Nigeria because of local government taxes. And if you don't have money in your pocket, your car will be kept there for at least 10 hours. So if the bills or any section will also address these issues of multiplicity of taxes, I think it's something that we should all look at. And I also want to remind us that we are discussing the general principles of the bills. The specifics will be looked into whenever we go for the public hearing. We'll get the experts, we'll get the traditional institution, we'll get our governors and all other stakeholders concerned to make their input. We will not pass anything here that will not be in the best interest of Nigerians. We believe strongly that what is good for Nigeria is what we will do. And we should at this stage even say, let's go for the second reading so that we can subject it to legislative processes. Who do I call so that, no, I won't put any question until I hear from Senator Ndume.
Alin Dume, who was my minority leader in the House of Reps, a leader in the Senate, and immediate first chief whip of the Senate with all the cognate experience of lawmaking. I beg to disagree with him that this bill should be withdrawn first and consultation should be held with the Nigerian Governors Forum and traditional rulers. We have a procedure which is clearly and unambiguously stated in our rule book for the process of lawmaking. And the Constitution, in a very clear and unambiguous terms, gave us the powers to regulate our proceedings.
Section 60.
Section 60. And pursuant to Section 60 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, we gave these rules to ourselves in order to guide our proceedings. And then the process of lawmaking is very clear and ambiguous as per this book, that second reading, it will be now transmitted to the committee for public hearing. In the course of the public hearing, Nigerians of all walks of life, of all groups, will come and aggregate, including the governors and traditional rulers, are free
and governors,
to come and ventilate their opinion.
And governors forum.
Yes, that's why, including the governors forum and traditional rulers, are free to come and ventilate their opinion as to the pros and the cons of the bill before the public hearing, so that our committee will now look at the various submissions, aggregate it, and then bring it for clause by clause consideration. So this procedure that Senator Ndume, with all this due respect, has suggested is foreign to process of legislative exercise, and therefore is purely academic and should not be considered.
But not rhetoric.
Not rhetoric. It's an academic exercise, not worthy of legislative consideration. It's an academic exercise, not worthy of legislative consideration. So, Mr. President, having said that, my contribution on the general principles of the bill is that this bill, as it is proposed, I am particularly on the issue of reducing the tax burden on Nigerians, removing VAT on food, medicals, education, pharmaceuticals, and electricity were exempted from VAT. So this bill is noble, is for people, because it's trying to reduce the tax burden on Nigerians, so that it is the big earners that are going to be taxed for the purpose of then with regard to the issue of pay, people that are not earning more than the minimum wage are also exempted from pay as you earn tax. This will also go a long way in reducing the tax burden on Nigerians. And then with regard to the issue of company income tax that was reduced from 30 to 25%, it's equally good, because that will give an opportunity for the companies to employ more Nigerians and what have you. So on that general principle, Mr. President, distinguished senators, I support that this bill should go for second reading.
The Nigeria Tax Reforms Bill is a significant move to overhaul the country's tax system. These bills aim to simplify the tax landscape, reduce the burden on small business, and streamline how taxes are collected. In broad terms, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, the four bills seek to ensure uniformity in tax revenue administration in Nigeria in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, eliminate the incidence of double taxation across the country, deploy taxation as a tool to encourage private sector investments in critical industries, and boost individual disposal incomes through targeted tax exemptions as captured in the various bills. In the area of tax exemptions,
please. Senator Zongo Lora, resume your seat.
In the area of tax exemptions, there is a proposal to exempt those whose salaries are not more than the minimum wage from the pay as you earn deductions, while small businesses with annual turnover of 50 million naira or less are equally exempted from payment of taxes. Similarly, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, there is proposed huge reduction in company income tax from the current 30% to 25% by 2026 as part of deliberate attempt to curtail the incidence of double taxation and multiplicity of taxes and levies, multiple taxes hitherto paid by companies under various tax heads, namely 2.5% education tax, 0.25% Naseni tax, have been harmonized into a development levy of 2%, which by the year 2030 will be applied to fund the newly established student loan scheme, which will benefit many Nigerian youths. Furthermore, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, unlike what is obtainable under the existing tax regime, whereby the federal government takes a lion's share of the value-added tax revenues, it is proposed that the sharing formula should allow state government share 55%. It is proposed that the sharing formula should allow state government share 55% of VAT revenue from the current 15% to 10% sharing formula. However, local government share of the VAT revenue remains unaffected. Relatedly, basic items consumed by Nigerian households, such as food items, medical services, and pharmaceuticals, educational fees, electricity, and etc., are exempted from value-added tax. Again, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, as part of efforts to ease the administration of income taxes and levies across the Federation, there is a reasonable effort made to consolidate core tax statutes and related tax legislations. Minority Leader, please resume your seat. Distinguished colleagues, contrary to misrepresentations in the public domain, apparently owing also, we must admit, to lack of adequate sensitization regarding the intendment of the bills under consideration, I wish to state that these bills contain innovative and people-oriented proposals as part of government deliberate fiscal and tax reform measures to cushion the effect of ongoing broader economic policies such as the removal of subsidy on petroleum products, renewed efforts to implement cost-reflective electricity tariffs in the power sector, and etc. on Nigerian citizens. Background to the proposed bills. Mr. President and most distinguished senators of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 has altered, and a plethora of federal and state enactments, as well as case law, constitute the extant legal framework for tax administration in Nigeria. While the Constitution, as a grown norm, provides for the taxing powers, cum legislative powers of the three tiers of government, there are enactments at the federal and state levels on specific taxes and levies, which the courts have given judicial recognition in the course of exercising its adjudicatory powers under our Constitution. Apart from the couples of primary federal and subnational tax statutes, there are equally other statutes that are not purely tax legislations, but nevertheless impose profound tax obligations on Nigerian citizens and other entities doing business in Nigeria. The sheer multiplicity of conflicting statutes and case law on taxes and levies in Nigeria at the federal and subnational levels is quite confounding, that makes it difficult for efficient tax administration.
There is no gainsaying that the appellate court's interpretation of extant statutes has either created more confusion or generated more controversy, especially as it relates to the taxing powers of the three tiers of government, the jurisdiction of existing courts and tribunals, etc. Beyond this, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, experts had in the past harped on the need for consolidation of tax statutes in Nigeria in simple and easy language to allow seamless administration of public revenue in Nigeria. These bills seek to address some of these lapses in the existing legal and institutional framework tax administration in Nigeria. 2. Specific structure and objectives of respective tax bills. The Joint Revenue Board of Nigeria Establishment Bill 2024 SB 583 is made up of 60 clauses subdivided into 7 parts and 3 schedules. Its specific objectives, as can be gleaned from clause 1 of the bill, is to A, provide the legal and institutional framework for the harmonization and coordination of revenue administration in Nigeria. B, provide a mechanism for efficient dispute resolution. C, promote the rights of taxpayers. Accordingly, novel provisions in SB 583 include establishment of the Joint Revenue Board under Part 2, clauses 3 to 22, to replace the Joint Tax Board, establishment of the Tax Appeal Tribunal with some level of autonomy under Part 5, clauses 23 to 34, and establishment of the Office of the Tax Ombudsman to facilitate investigation of tax complaints made by taxpayers. 3. The Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill 2024 SB 584. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the bill is made up of 43 clauses subdivided into 6 parts and 3 schedules. The objective of the bill is to provide for the legal, institutional, and regulatory framework for administration of taxes and revenue under any law made by the National Assembly, and to account for such taxes and revenue collected. Key novel provision is the establishment of the Nigeria Revenue Service with broader powers over revenues accruing to the Federation. The implication is that unlike the FIRS, the NRS will be more involved in collection and administration of all taxes and duties accruing to the Federation, including those in the petroleum sector and those administered currently by other federal government agencies, such as the Nigerian Ports Authority, the NIMASA, and the Nigerian Customs Service, etc. The Nigeria Tax Administration Bill 2024 SB 585 on its own is made up of 144 clauses subdivided into 5 chapters, with some of the chapters further subdivided into parts as follows. The specific objectives of the bill, as outlined under clause 1, is to provide for uniform procedures for a consistent and efficient administration of tax laws in order to facilitate tax compliance by taxpayers and optimize tax revenues. Specifically, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, the bill provides assessment, collection, and accounting for particular taxes and levies by the 3 tiers of government, especially on matters of income tax, capital gains, and etc. There are novel provisions, including copious provisions that allow for automation in tax collection and integration of technology into tax administration, harmonization of tax offenses and penalties to promote enforcement and compliance, introduction of installment tax payment, model under certain conditions, and introduction of the principle of derivation in the sharing of value-added tax revenue, unlike the current arrangement that relies on the places of VAT remittance, which is usually the headquarters of service and goods suppliers, and not locations across the country where the goods and services are actually consumed. The current arrangement, unlike what is proposed, unduly favors the most industrialized states in Nigeria, to the detriment of states where such goods and services are actually consumed, but are not lucky to host the headquarters of these service and good suppliers. The Nigeria Tax Bill 2024 SB 586. The Nigeria Bill, this bill is essentially a compendium of taxes and levies charged in Nigeria and payable by individuals and companies. Accordingly, when passed, will repeal about 11 existing federal and state statutes, since all of them have been consolidated, updated, and simplified under this bill. The reforms also include a more progressive personal income tax system with reduced rates for low-income earners, for instance, those earning under 800,000 naira, annually payable on personal income tax. Mr. President, very distinguished colleagues, in the considered wisdom of this Senate, following our discussions in the executive session or the closed door session, it was resolved that, as we promised in plenary yesterday, we will still bring the tax team and experts who came to address us in plenary yesterday back for us to ask them questions. But again, like I said, in the wisdom of the Senate, we feel in bringing them back, they should be brought back actually to the public hearing, where not only senators, but other stakeholders, as well as members of public, will have a chance to ask them questions. And we cannot get to this stage unless this bill passes second reading, so that it is referred statutorily to the Senate Committee on Finance that will be able to organize the public hearing. So, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, these bills should be seen as part of the required legislative intervention to support ongoing fiscal and tax reform measures needed to reposition the Nigerian economy for growth and productivity. The bills should be considered with great sense of patriotism and exercise of the powers of the National Assembly under Section 59 of our Constitution regarding imposition of taxes. I therefore, Mr. President, urge my distinguished colleagues to support this bill for second reading. I so move, Mr. President.
Minority be allowed to go for the second reading. Those in support say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. These bills are now referred to the Committee on Finance to revert to the Senate in 6 weeks. The Chairman Finance, the bills will go now into second reading. Before the clerk does so, I want you to note what your colleagues have said, that all the concerned groups in the country must be invited to the public hearing. The Governors Forum, the traditional institution, the CSOs, the NGOs, and all concerned Nigerians, so that at the end, before it comes back here, for us to do further consideration clause by clause, Nigerians would have had the opportunity of making inputs and then deleting some sections, including some, reducing some of the provisions and adding some, and then at the end we will bring them back for our consideration. So the Clerk of the Senate. A bill for an act to establish the Joint Revenue Board, the Tax Appeal Tribunal, and the Office of the Tax Ombudsman for the harmonization, coordination, and settlement of disputes arising from the revenue administration in Nigeria and for related matters 2024, second reading taken. Distinguished colleagues, a bill for an act to establish the Joint Revenue Board, the Tax Appeal Tribunal, and the Office of the Tax Ombudsman for the harmonization, coordination, and settlement of disputes arising from revenue administration in Nigeria and for related matters 2024, second reading taken, and now referred to the Committee on Finance for further consideration. Distinguished colleagues, a bill for an act to repeal the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act number 13/2007 and enact the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Act to establish the Nigerian Revenue Service charged with powers of assessment, collection of, and accounting for revenue accruable to the government of the Federation and for related matters 2024, second reading taken. Distinguished colleagues, a bill for an act to provide for the assessment, collection of, and accounting for revenue accruing to the Federation account, states and local governments, prescribe the powers and functions of tax authorities and for related matters 2024, second reading taken. Distinguished colleagues, a bill for an act to repeal certain acts on taxation and consolidate the legal frameworks relating to taxation and enact the Nigeria Tax Act to provide for taxation of income, transactions, and instruments and for related matters 2024, second reading taken. Distinguished colleagues, the four bills read so far are now referred to the Senate committees.
Finance, I dropped it. Committee on Finance.
On Finance.
Just Finance. Just Finance.
Senate committees on Finance.
That's all. It's Finance. It's Finance.
For further legislative actions, including public hearings, collation of all views, opinions, tinker with, delete, add, subtract, and revert to this August Assembly on or before 6 weeks. Leader of the Senate. Let me thank my colleagues for the considerations of these executive bills, and also thank all those who contributed, particularly the fact that even though we have not gone into specifics, some of my colleagues were able to bring out certain good aspects of the bills and also certain contentious issues in the bills, and to let the public know that the process of lawmaking is not about presenting a bill and then withdrawing it to go and consult with the public before coming back to the Senate. The process of lawmaking is referring the bill to the public for public hearing and then consultation before bringing back to the Senate for passage into law. As a matter of fact, this is just the beginning of the journey of these bills. The public is now invited, even those who came yesterday, to give us lectures are going to be part of those in the public hearing. Then all the ministers involved will be part of those at the public hearing. The governors will be part of those. The governors do not make laws. Therefore, the governors forum cannot make laws in the neck. They will come to the National Assembly and be part of the public hearing. And at the end, their views will be consolidated, taking into account before the bills are now brought back in a report by the Senate Committee on Finance for our further consideration, clause by clause, and thereafter we pass. We go ahead to read the bill. We pass it for third reading before we transmit to Mr. President for assent. So the process is just beginning. And I thank all of you for your concerns. I thank all of you for your contributions, and I hope this will bring all the confusion to an end. So, distinguished Senate Leader, in view of the time, you may wish to move that we suspend every other item on the order paper for the day to consolidate on the main issue of the tribute to our late icon, the former Senate President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, distinguished late Senator Joseph Wires. Move for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President.